I would like to introduce David Nedohin, ScopeAR's Chief Customer Officer and co-founder.
Thank you, Sam. I'm super excited for today. So we've got an amazing guest who's going to share some experiences that I know we're all going to learn from, including myself. Just a little bit of kind of setup for that. In the past, we focused on some of our key industries like aerospace and medical device. And we've talked about different types of takeaways, things like how to grow support for AR and how to build adoption, navigating challenges like IT and infrastructure and change management, and really discussing kind of the journey, like, how do you get started to the point of showing value, and a lot around kind of that process, as well as some of the specific measurables themselves. Today's a little bit different and very exciting. So first of all, a completely different industry and kind of a third area that we really focus on as our organization, industrial manufacturing. So that includes typically like OEMs that build like and distribute equipment for others, around the world. And this is things like, or could include, I guess, different industries like additive manufacturing or data centers, mobile power generation, or in this case, and specifically in MHI's case with Steve, we're going to talk about sort of that corrugated box manufacturing. So what these all have in common is often big, not always big, but complicated equipment that really you need to ensure that you've got high uptime, that it's serviceable, that you've got happy customers. So that's where Steve has done an incredible job. So a little bit about Steve before I pass it off. Steve Laslo has been with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries for 8 years and has had a bunch of different critical roles within MHIA's service department. So currently leading digital technology and training, where he's responsible for building a team to leverage emerging technologies and develop kind of new, innovative digital service programs for their customers. So they've grown from sort of a small proof of concept that started in Steve's mind in terms of something that might be possible to kind of a highly successful program for MHI now. So it's really an incredible story. And it leverages augmented reality using WorkLink's platform to provide field service technicians and customers alike with sort of a centralized access to troubleshooting resources and technical support. So Steve's primary goal is really to equip MHI with the tools that ensure that MHI remains sort of that gold standard in customer service. So, happy customers, just making sure that obviously you can retain those customers, that you can sell more, that you keep the uptime of the equipment. So really, really important focus point for him, that he's been able to leverage technology to support those objectives. Normally, we keep this very conversational, just kind of lots of back and forth. Today, it's a little bit different because Steve truly is the expert. So he's going to sort of share his recipe, or what he can, in terms of like how to succeed. I know we've had many customers ask about this. How do you actually build sort of a business model that's not only going to support your customers, but potentially generate some additional revenue? And I know it's something that you can absolutely do in several ways. So Steve's going to share his journey, and I know it's something that we're all going to be super excited to learn from. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, David. And thanks everyone for joining today. I'm Steve Laslo, Digital Technology and Training Manager with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries Corrugated Machinery Division. So today I'll go over a little bit of our AR story, how we got started, some challenges we had to overcome, and then like where we are planning to head in the future. But first off, I want to give you a little background into our industry. Next slide, please. So Mitsubishi Heavy Industries is part of the larger Mitsubishi group. You may have heard of Mitsubishi Motors. So that's one of the many divisions within Mitsubishi. Within Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, there's about 300 different companies around the world that operate in various industries. My particular headquarters is in Hunt Valley, Maryland, and we're part of the corrugated manufacturing division. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So as I said, one of the industries that Mitsubishi Heavy Industries operates in is the corrugated industry. Corrugated Machinery Division is the specific American branch of the company in this industry within Mitsubishi. So we design, manufacture, and support the industrial equipment that makes cardboard boxes. I call it cardboard within within the corrugated industry, that's a bit of a misnomer. It's mostly referred to as corrugated fiberboard. So if I say that interchangeably, just know that's what I'm talking about. Our flagship machine is called the EVOL, which is a flexo folder gluer, and that I'll get into a little bit of how that works, but a lot of our equipment is widely adopted in our industry. So many of the Amazon boxes that you get delivered on a regular basis, there's a good chance that that was actually made on one of our machines. Next slide, please. So within the corrugated industry, there's kind of two branches, corrugating and then finishing. A corrugator, pictured at the top, is it takes giant rolls of paper and then converts that into flat sheets of corrugated fiberboard. It starts off at kind of what we call the single facer. It takes those rolls and uses pressure, heat, moisture, and adhesive to create the wavy pattern, the flutes in that paperboard. And then it passes it through the machine where later on down the line, a glue machine applies the bottom liner to that sheet to make a flat sheet of corrugated fiberboard. So that's one half of the industry, really. The other half is finishing, and within the finishing equipment is flexo folder gluers, which is where our EVOL is one of the most popular machines in that category. And what the flexo folder gluers do is take a flat sheet of corrugated board, feed it through print units that apply ink in whatever particular logo or pattern you want to have on that box. It then slots and creases the sheet so that it can be folded and glued together and then stacked and counted at the counter ejector. And that's the format that it shows up in most warehouses, where it'll use a case erector, open that up, and then fill it with whatever product is being shipped out. So that's kind of the background of what our machines do and how they kind of relate to you. Next slide, please. So why augmented reality? I guess we kind of got our start working with augmented reality around 2018, I would say. And that was around the time Pokemon Go was very popular. A lot of people in the AR community have probably heard of that. But with the kind of popularity of that, a lot of people started looking at what you could use that same technology for in an industrial environment. And then so that was kind of where we got our start. And the way that we kind of looked at it differently, perhaps than some others, is we wanted to use it as both an internal and an external resource and offer that as kind of a product to our customers that they could benefit from the same kind of internal training resources that we develop to train our team. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges that we're thinking about whenever we are developing this program is obviously on-the-job training is very expensive and time-consuming. That used to be our primary form of training our field service technicians, and we're sort of in a transition point now where we're trying to use this new technology to help kind of leverage training tools to bring them up to speed a little bit faster and use a little less on-the-job training. Our customers also, it's a high turnover environment, especially at the kind of operator position for those machines. It takes a little bit of experience to know how to make adjustments to make a good box. And so one of the things that we're focused on is developing a tool that can be used to bring somebody up to speed very quickly on how to operate and maintain our equipment. Our customers are somewhat reliant on our customer service team, so that I wanted to be able to develop something that's kind of a centralized platform that we can use both as a resource and as method of communication back and forth between us and our customers. So it's a couple other things is it's difficult to follow the correct procedures if you're all being trained by on-the-job training and kind of tribal knowledge. This allows us to kind of centralize our official correct procedures. And then obviously capturing knowledge from an aging workforce and being able to pass that on to the next generation is important, as well as sort of having a clear understanding during downtime events of our customers' equipment. Sometimes a simple miscommunication leads us down a rabbit hole and we spend too much time focused on that. And that extends the amount of time that that machine stays down for. Next slide, please. So some of the things we're thinking about in terms of developing solutions for those problems, we need to be a quick onboarding, like an orientation for both internal and external employees. So we wanted to basically be able to create something that our internal team would benefit from, and then also offer that to our customers as a digital product that they could subscribe to. We want to develop detailed training tools so that when you are teaching someone who has no experience with our equipment, they're learning the correct way to perform certain procedures. And we wanted all of that to be in one central location using familiar devices without significant need for like training on how to use, for example, the HoloLens. That's a great sort of product, but what we wanted to get started with at least is something that was more of an iOS, a user-friendly device that everybody kind of grows up nowadays knowing how to use right away. And as the wearable devices take off, we wanted it to be a platform that isn't committed one way or another, so that we can transition to that sort of new technology as it gets more and more advanced. Next slide, please. So that was where we ultimately ended up meeting ScopeAR, and I think we went to an industry event, met with their team, and then they were able to kind of help us develop a initial proof of concept. And we took that and kind of very gradually grew that into a much larger product now. So what we started with was really just the remote connection capabilities. And then we added on to that as we grew our AR content library on their platform, the WorkLink platform. We slowly kind of kept adding more and more content as we came up with new ideas of what would be useful for our customers, what would be useful for our technicians to have access to at their fingertips. Next slide, please. So what we're basically doing is kind of relicensing ScopeAR's software, and then we're developing content on that platform so that we can provide that technology to our customers so that they can take advantage of that. Next slide, please. And then on that WorkLink platform, that gives our customers and our field service guys access to a wide database of expertise and knowledge. And it implements obviously kind of the two most popular use cases of augmented reality within the same application. That would be the kind of remote connection, like augmented reality enhanced FaceTime call sort of functionality with the 3D model AR representation animated procedures. Next slide. So the remote assist functionality is really important for us because that gives us direct contact with the on-site user, and it shares audio and video and allows us to annotate our instructions to them. Something that if you're at all in customer service in a technical capacity, you'll learn a lot of the times who you're dealing with over the phone, they may call something a different term than you're used to calling it. There's oftentimes a bit of a communication barrier. So any tools that we have that can kind of get us past that difficulty and make it more clear, what is the problem you're experiencing, and what like checkpoints we should be taking into account right now. So explaining that visually is much easier than trying to describe to somebody, go to, the cabinet on the other side of the machine, look for the red blinking light. So that's kind of a little bit of a background on why we really appreciate the remote assist functionality. Next. As far as work instructions, that's what I think is really the most like flashy and really impressive part of this. So as we kind of continued developing the program, we managed to get the 3D models. When we actually started, we didn't even have the 3D model of our equipment. But as we started to show some signs of success, we were able to kind of farm out some of the older 2D CAD models and have them converted into the 3D models so that we could import that into the platform and then start developing these reference materials and step-by-step procedures. The nice thing there is that it doesn't just kind of explain how to perform a certain task, it actually animates those instructions, and it really helps the user to be able to better understand a much more complicated process if they can see it happening. Next. So here's a quick list of all of our procedures that we started out with. So we started trying to basically create the low-hanging fruit, as it were, for the procedures that we had available to us. So we started with a lot of the gap and limit calibrations on our machines. What that does is basically we use potentiometers or encoders on the equipment to determine the home position of every axis on the machine, and from there it has to set up to a particular place in order for example, the knives to hit that box in the right position to cut the slots out and then pass it through to the next section. So what we first started building is all the limit adjustment procedures and the gap calibration, because those are not particularly difficult to animate. We're not talking about a whole lot of different parts that have to move. We're basically taking previously existing procedures that we had in PDF form and then converting them into an AR format, just so that we can get them out there and at people's fingertips very easily. Next. So the next thing we decided to build out is our wear part replacement package that we just finished last year. Anyone in maintenance will understand that there are certain parts that have to be replaced on a periodic basis. You have parts of your machine that you expect to wear out over time, and things like rubber wheels, belts, yokes that move heads back and forth. So those were common procedures that a brand new maintenance or operation technician would really benefit from knowing how to do and how to do correctly, how to check for wear limits and how to know when it's the right time to replace particular components. So we built a lot of those wear part replacement procedures next, because again, that's kind of another step up in complexity of development. We went from really animating 1 or 2 parts to now we're in the realm of maybe 5, 10 different parts that are being manipulated. You unbolt certain like plates and then replace the yoke, bolt it back together, and the machine can go back up and running. And then now we're into the more advanced maintenance procedures where we're developing almost much more mechanically complicated component replacement. So things that involve having to take covers off and get into a gearbox and and loosen something up and then make an adjustment to that. Do a backlash adjustment in a rack and pinion gear. So that's a little bit more of an in-depth, detailed procedure that we kind of waited until later on to develop once we had gotten a little more familiar with the WorkLink Create platform. Next. So this is an example of us using some of our procedures. When you first log into the application, you'll see a list of all this scenarios that are available to you. What we do is we organize our customers in a way so that we can give everybody access to the latest procedure that we complete. First thing they'll do is align the model, and within that you kind of have two different ways of doing that. You have an image mode and surface mode. So the first part here is going to show image mode, where you have like a QR code that automatically places the model. This is the feed unit of our machine. So then once you've placed that model, you can follow the instructions and walk around it. And then surface mode basically allows the camera to identify the surface and then set the model on that surface once it identifies a flat place for it to position itself. And then you tap the screen to confirm it. So again, this is kind of what we're doing is with a smaller scale model of our machine. We focused initially on like a classroom training kind of environment. A lot of the newer functionality with augmented reality allows you to use the instructions on the actual equipment in person, but we were a little concerned going into it that there might be potential safety concerns with our customers. We weren't sure, with this being a new technology, how well it would be adopted yet. So we wanted to start with building a classroom training kind of environment tool that can be used. Next. I think that's the same slide, sorry. There we go. So once you have the model placed, you can use the arrows to navigate back and forth through the steps of the procedure. You'll often have like a main menu that you can select the different options. So what I'm showing here is our print unit lateral adjustment. As I was saying, these are like limit switch adjustments that you need to be able to have the motion stop at a particular location so it doesn't cause mechanical interference between two parts. So what we can do is kind of use that to demonstrate visually how to adjust that limit switch in the right position. Next. Within a lot of our procedures, and this is something I really like about the WorkLink specifically, is we have these like pop outs sections of the machine that we can kind of animate in a close up, or we can provide like a chart. So with the EVOL platform, we have multiple different size machines, and that means that it'll handle a different variety of box sizes that run through the equipment. But that also means that the calibration procedure is a little bit different from one machine to the next. So being able to have kind of a little pop-out chart that shows what the different measurement is depending on the machine type allows us to use one procedure to represent multiple different machines without having to load in the exact different model of the equipment and kind of move forward developing the procedures without that. So next. So some of these procedures also include, I'm calling it CMS steps. I'm not sure what the official term there is, but it allows you to kind of click a checkbox and record that certain steps were completed. It allows you to kind of remote verify specific tasks were performed. So if you have an approval process for particular procedures, this allows you to give it a confirmation and take a picture, for example, to show that you've completed a certain part of that step before you can move on to the next step of the procedure. I think that's it. Next. So some of the other menu options, you can align the project. Again, if it gets off, use the standalone device mode. What I'm showing here is our counter ejector, the part of the machine that actually takes the bundles and counts up every box and ejects a certain number per stack. You also have the option to go between interactive mode, and that's really allows you to take it onto the machine. So what we started with, as I was saying, is more of a classroom training environment, and then using interactive mode allowed a nice easy transition to actually using the smaller scale model at the machine as a reference material. So you can use standard gestures on an iPad or Android tablet to zoom in and out and scroll around. And that allows you to use it as a kind of a more advanced maintenance manual for our equipment. So where you can use the actual augmented reality, place it on the table and then walk around it. That allows you to use it in a classroom setting, but then using interactive mode really lets us use it at the machine without having scaled up the project to like full augmented reality instructions on the equipment. Next. So this is just kind of a quick reminder of what some of the important difficult challenges are with developing this. So we want to avoid miscommunication between our technicians and our customers. We want to develop a training that is less expensive than on-the-job training. We want to offer something that allows high turnover positions to be trained quickly, as well as something that would kind of help make your job easier or more interesting and maybe reduce that turnover as well. We want our customers to be a little bit more self-reliant and be able to use this as a tool to solve the problem before reaching out for customer service. But we also want that when they do need help, that they have a quick, easy way to reach out to our customer service team. And we want to standardize the process of all of these complicated procedures by capturing a lot of the expertise of our senior workforce and being able to use that to help benefit our new employees. Next. So some of the results of us actually implementing this in terms of miscommunication, something that a specific example of this was that a customer in Brazil, I know, was having a feeding issue in 2021. International travel was not really happening at the time, so sending a technician down to help them troubleshoot was not an option. Using WorkLink kind of helped us bridge the language gap. Now, their technicians, some of them speak English perfectly well, but some of them, it's English as a second language, and that helps being able to annotate and clearly explain instructions in a visual manner. Kind of helps them understand what the checkpoint is without having to translate everything. What we were able to do is kind of quickly resolve that issue without actually having to send a technician out. So what I would estimate is in a situation like that where you're not having to send a technician to the plant to solve the problem, the downtime is actually often more of an impact financially to our customers than the cost of a technician. So the reduction in downtime is a huge advantage of being able to avoid any kind of miscommunication in the troubleshooting process. Next. In terms of turnover and using this as a training platform, we have about 50 field service engineers. So our on-the-job training got to be a very expensive process. We've started recently integrating our AR procedures into the onboarding process. And what we're trying to accomplish there is not eliminating on-the-job training, because it is important to actually get your hands on the equipment in order to know and understand something, but really be able to reduce that time frame. If we can accelerate the transition of a trainee into a qualified service technician, that'll save us quite a bit of overhead cost in training. So also sending a technician to a plant for operator or maintenance training can be quite expensive for a week at a time. So with high turnover rates, what our customers end up often seeing is that it can be a waste of time to have a technician come out to the plant, train their entire team, and then end up a few months from there having a different team operating the machine and needing to do the training all over again. So having the ability to provide a digital product that our customer can use to train their staff on site without having to send a technician for every training job, that'll help them have a consistent training process, potentially reduce turnover. And when there is turnover, it allows them to quickly train that team member up. So even in the event of like a 5 to 10% reduction in training costs, that's substantial when I think about the overall savings between both us and our customers in this industry. Next. In terms of emergency service, that is probably one of the most expensive parts of operating a service business, is when preventive maintenance has failed and you have to send somebody on a plane to fly across the country to solve a problem. So one example specifically of this, us being able to kind of solve a customer's problem, was they were a particular customer who was signed up for our digital service program that includes the AR platform. They were having a problem with their folding rails on the EVOL, and simply by providing a procedure for them to perform that task themselves, which historically had been a required service visit in order to be able to do, because it's fairly complicated and it's sometimes difficult for a maintenance technician who hasn't had any experience with that job to perform that task. They were able to save themselves the cost of having a technician fly out to the plant to solve that problem. And that alone in and of itself kind of pays for the program subscription. So next. So that's kind of my quick overview of our journey from kind of a small like proof of concept into a much more fleshed out program. And we're still definitely developing more and more content. And we have a lot of ideas of where we're headed kind of with this program in the future.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Steve. This was, I mean, great to just kind of see the evolution in terms of where you started, what the vision was, some of the use cases you're talking about, and the costs, like obviously the importance of those to your organization. And I think the use cases you pointed out are universal. I mean, when you mentioned like the cost of training somebody, I mean, it's something that every one of our customers and probably everybody on this call is experiencing in one way or another. We actually had one customer that shared that over a year they trained 3,000 employees, and by the end of the year they were net positive 300 employees. So
Okay.
when you think about the cost of training employees who are remote, flying them into different locations, needing to put equipment in their hands, it's not always there and available. How do you do that? And I think, there's a bunch of studies that were done recently that show that that cost was somewhere in the range of $25,000 per employee to train them. So extremely, extremely expensive problem. I'm sure that's something that you guys thought lots about in terms of like starting points for this and the impact that you might have.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's a number of questions that have come in. It looks like there's some really great ones here that you might want to talk to. I can certainly jump in on a few as well. So if anybody does have additional questions while we're answering some of these, just put them into the Q&A, and we'll certainly try and get through as many as possible. There's a question, I think Fran has sent in a couple questions that are both related, so maybe I'd love to get your thoughts on this. The first one talks about handheld devices, iOS or Android, which obviously WorkLink supports, as you mentioned, both the handheld devices and HoloLens, different use cases, right? The question was, how are the people in the field using those devices for troubleshooting, when they need to hold that device with one hand? I know you talked a little bit about it, but maybe even just touch on that a little bit. And the second part to that question, if I have a look at it, was, are people accepting of the less immersive experience, or have you tried even the HoloLens? So kind of get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So we have, we actually just recently got a HoloLens, and I really like that technology and being able to have it as a wearable. So we are really getting to that point now where I think the wearable device is going to be quite popular as an option. We wanted to initially to start out with something that everyone's already kind of familiar with, and then eventually kind of transition that direction. As far as the having one hand used while you're trying to do turn a wrench on a machine, one of the things that's nice is when you have the tracking QR code, you can set the tablet down, go in, disconnect whatever it was that you were as you're following along, kind of come back if you get stuck and you need the next step, and then pick it up and point it at that QR code, and it realigns the model very quickly and easily. So even if you have to kind of go back and forth between it a little bit, they already kind of are used to having to do that with like a maintenance manual or like a PDF instruction that they printed out that they're going to have to be able to use as a reference for performing a certain task. So that's a problem that I think is already kind of inherent in the existing world. And then as you kind of get more and more used to it, you might be able to use it more as like a training device. Like, let's just review this particular process before we go out to the machine to perform it. So that's another kind of example of how you can kind of get around that hurdle.
Yeah, that's for sure. And just from other customers, some of the experiences that we're seeing is that there is definitely a right place for something like the HoloLens. Some of our aerospace customers in particular are using HoloLens almost exclusively in a manufacturing environment where they're taking the time to make sure that the employees are trained. They have all the proper procedures and kits and lessons on how to use a HoloLens, how do you put it away, all of the work that was into that. And they, they'll wear the HoloLens for 4 or 5 hours. They've got supporting battery packs, works extremely well under the right environment and the right training and the right setup. But that's not for everybody. So we have probably large majority of our end users, of our customers' end users, do use handhelds and tablets, and you have to kind of identify what the problem is and how best to support that with a handheld. So to your point, is it aligning the content onto the equipment you're working on, going through some steps, putting it down, doing the work, using a checklist item like a photo to validate that you've done it correctly? Or is it, like you said, a refresher where you're putting that holographic view right in front of you, maybe in a scaled down mode, you can still go through all the same steps, or potentially putting it into an interactive, more like that kind of tablet. So it really, there's no right answer of you should use tablets or handhelds, or you should use a HoloLens. It really does depend on the use case. And I think this year, what's exciting for us and yourself and probably all the industry is that we're going to see a number of other hardware devices come out. I mean, that's inevitable. And we're seeing that through some of the announcements that have been made over the last few months. So looking forward to that. And probably like every other hardware, there'll be different price ranges, different use cases. Certainly not going to be a one size fits all for anybody.
Yeah. And maybe even to answer a question that hasn't been asked yet, but I know one of the typical hurdles is kind of driving that adoption at the end user level. So one of the things that kind of helps is maybe they're not at a point where they're real comfortable using like a HoloLens, but they might already know how to use an iOS or Android device, or they might already have a cell phone out at the plant floor. So that kind of help you kind of get around a hurdle of getting getting the application in the hands of the end user and getting them to start adopting it more.
Yeah, absolutely. Change management and adoption is a big part of that. So thinking about that, planning forward, who's the users, what's the experience going to look like, and how do we best support them? So awesome. Couple other questions that have come in, Steve. One from Scott. Another one looks like it came in from Ivy. Both kind of around the licensing and passing on cost to the customers. So Scott had asked, is the cost of the AIR services passed on to the customer, or is it value add? So in other words, asking about the business model. So you've created this content. Is it every customer that gets it, or how do they get it? And I think it ties into Ivy's question around what is MHI's customer licensing structure like? So how did that maybe start, and where has it evolved? And
yeah. So when we first started, we definitely were kind of dipping our toes in the water a little bit and kind of seeing what the reaction from our customer base would be. So we started with primarily using like the licenses that allow them to use the remote calling feature. And we got about maybe 10, 12 different customers out there that we set up at very little cost to them, just trying to float the idea out to the market and get some feedback on what their experience was and start going from there. And then once we started developing more of the content, then we started kind of a subscription model with our customers. So we had some legacy like online training programs, some like web-based training modules that, rather than like chasing our customers for all these POs and trying to have extra barriers to them using it, we bundled the whole thing together into a single, what we're calling just a digital services program. And then we're rolling in our like after hours support into that as well. So whereas a lot of people who have a like 24/7 tech support, when it's after hours, your customers are paying on like a per call basis, or they're signing up for some level of service that gives them access to your engineers after normal business hours to help them solve problems on their equipment. So we kind of decided that the best way to go about that is to bundle that together into the program, and then basically kind of move slowly with our development to reach the point where we have the amount of content that we do now.
Fantastic. So a couple other questions. One from Gabe. This talks a little bit about the handheld devices, but I think it might also touch on sort of how does the customer access the content in terms of like devices they have? Do you send out devices? And what does that look like in terms of maybe security and IT?
Yeah.
Like how did you kind of approach that?
So we kind of learned some lessons along those lines. What we initially did with the first maybe 10 customers that we had is we provided an iPad that we loaded up ourselves. We set everything up, installed the app, installed the license, and then we sent that to our customer and gave them the login information to use it. Some of the issues we ran into, the customer IT departments didn't really appreciate them getting a device from another party to put on their internal network. So in order to avoid all of that, what we ended up doing is we basically relicense just the software. We allow the customer's IT department to supply the device and use whatever kind of security measures are standard for that. And we supply them with kind of guidelines as far as what firewall rules will be required to use the app correctly. And then we just kind of set them up with the license. The nice thing about WorkLink is you can send that license to the customer just by putting their email address in, filling out their name and hitting send, and then they're in charge of the license at that point.
Yeah, and this kind of ties in a little bit to Andrew's question. So in terms of acceptance, have you had any customers that were reluctant to, be part of a subscription service or to try that new technology? And how did you kind of address that?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's a kind of slow process. When we first started, there was definitely a lot of questions around getting value for money on a program that we really had just started, and we hadn't really developed any AR content on the work instructions side yet. So the early customers were really kind of taking a little bit of a leap of faith that we were going to continue building the program into what it ultimately became. But part of that was also internally within our company. We made a real commitment that like this was going to be the future of how we connect with our customers, how we help troubleshoot, how we provide them with troubleshooting resources. So there's going to be some kind of pushback on, especially early on, you're going to get some pushback, and it does take a little bit of commitment from the very beginning that you have to get past the initial point. And once you've developed the actual like procedures, I think showing that to our customers was really what got the buy-in from them very quickly, is they recognized quickly that this is a growing platform that we're going to continually update with all the procedures they would commonly need to take care of their equipment. So.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about it. Like you said, you're going to continually update it. So it's like you wake up in the morning and all of a sudden there's going to be potentially some new procedures that when you open your application up, it's like, great, now we have some new preventative maintenance procedures,
right,
or updated best practices or that type of thing. So I mean, showing is obviously the first step, and people going, oh, okay, this is something that I really want. And then as you develop more and more content, all of a sudden it becomes an incredibly powerful tool and a great investment for them. So from from that side of it, I guess one question again from Fran, so thank you for the questions. He was asking how long it takes to create those work instructions, which can be done several ways, but I don't know if you have maybe an easy way to sort of answer that from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of early on, it was a little bit of a challenge. It was really just like me taking this on as kind of a side project when we first started, and then eventually we started adding people to the team, and we've got an internal team that's developing the content now, and we're still growing that. It's still pretty small right now even, but what we kind of did early on is lean really heavily on the ScopeAR team, where you guys have a creative services group that helps us to build the content. So we can take previously existing PDF procedures and provide that to you guys with the 3D model of our equipment. And then you guys have a lot of like authoring capability that was able to help us get our program off the ground. And then we're at a point now where we're slowly kind of transitioning a lot of that development to our internal team.
Yeah, and that's so, yeah, the approach to that was great. And I think what we're seeing most common is that customers will often have our creative services team involved in helping maybe create the first project or work with their authors in creating that first project. It is a no coding platform, so really somebody with a little bit of like kind of idea of how 3D content works visually
right.
should have a relatively easy time learning this. But yeah, lots of times they'll leverage our team to help kind of kick things off, just to get that like really high quality project the very first time. Maybe that's done, a couple weeks. I mean, it depends on how complex the project.
Depending on the complexity of the project you're trying to work on, it could be, a week or two. You can turn out a pretty solid procedure on that. If it's much more complicated, there's a lot of steps involved in it. It might take a month or so in order to really kind of focus on getting all of that right. But it does really depend on kind of the complexity.
If you had a 4 or 5 step project that was just like do a couple things, you would have it out within
Yeah.
a couple hours. So it
Yeah,
really
you can
does.
turn that out in a day.
Yeah. So, but yeah, there's some different options around that. So if you're curious, you can certainly reach out to ourselves at Scope. You can reach out to Steve to learn more. One of the questions was, will there be a video recording of this made available? And I think Sam will probably mention that at the end, but yes, there will be. So we probably have time for a couple other questions. One I think is really interesting, and I think probably lots of people think about in terms of like sort of the whole digital thread. So you've got instructions, you're building content, but organizations have their own LMS systems or different systems of record. Yeah, the question is, did MHI or any of your customers have existing LMS systems that needed to be integrated too, or is that something on the roadmap? Where do those integrations fit for you?
Yeah, that's still kind of on our roadmap, I think. I'm sure a lot of our customers do have other LMS systems in place. They've got different kind. It also is in terms of like digitizing the tasks being performed on the equipment. That's something that's also kind of in the future pipeline for this. So what we started with is mostly trying to develop a modern day alternative to like a maintenance manual that allows you to get all that same information, but in a much easier to understand fashion. And then integration to specific customer LMSs for, onboarding processes of their brand new employees. That's kind of something we can work on down the line a little bit more once we're kind of completed building out the breadth of the procedures that we're planning on building.
Yeah, and so from a general perspective, when you look at the ScopeAR WorkLink platform, there's all sorts of information that's collected in terms of users and when they opened the instructions or made a call and how long and steps, and there's a quizzing module. All of that information is available through an API that can be integrated into various systems records. So we have all sorts of customers from leveraging kind of the entire spectrum of different systems of record, from a PLM to a MES to an LMS and so forth. And just being able to connect that data into your right system of record is extremely important, just for that main kind of maintaining that digital thread and just really accurately understanding exactly what was done and when. Let's see, a couple other, probably have time for one other question here. Gabe is asking about, have you had to deal with any revision control challenges on existing content?
Not particularly. So our the way we kind of planned out a lot of the content development of the program so far has been, we never started with really even the 3D model of the equipment. So what we started with is getting the 3D model of like the most popular flagship version of our machine. And then we use kind of explanations and annotations on it to make that more flexible for different versions, so that we don't have to make some very specific content changes for each individual customer. So some of that revision process, we got to basically avoid a little bit of that by generalizing the procedures that we're doing a little bit more. As we get more and more detailed, that may become a bit more of a concern. We may reach a point where we're developing individualized, very specific content for every specific assembly change on the machine. But so far, we haven't really run into that problem.
Yeah, but certainly something like you said that may come up, and certainly something that we have a number of customers that are very keen in understand that and making sure that the source information is going to be captured throughout, and you've got the right the right management of that revision control. So something that we're working on with a number of customers. So Yeah, really good question. I think that's probably getting close to wrapping up here. There are some additional questions that we'll send some specific answers to. In addition, this is all great conversation. We do have a community forum. So if you went to the ScopeAR website, scopear.com, and went into the community forum there, love to have your questions there, get some discussion going. I'm sure Steve and some of our other customers would love to jump on there and just continue that conversation. But yeah, please join that, and we'll try and answer some of these questions afterwards. So Sam, I guess back to you.
Yeah, thanks guys. That was an awesome webinar. Steve, thank you so much for your time and sharing your story with everyone. It's incredible. So like David said, we will be sending out a recording to everyone. Additionally, it appears this QR code's a little wonky. So I'm going to be sending out a link for this QR code to everyone as well, which is essentially just a link to try out WorkLink for yourself on your cell phone. It's pretty great. And I think that's about it. I'll send all the information about the community platform, and thank you everyone for attending.